He thought it was just old wood, just a creaky hallway in an old man's house. But when he pried up the third board from the left, what he found made him stagger back like he'd touched fire. It wasn't cash, it wasn't gold. It was something he didn't understand and never should have seen. I watched it all from the shadows. I didn't speak. I didn't stop him. Because that night I wasn't the victim. I was the architect. Before we go further, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were smarter than you? Now, let's go back to where this began. They say you can hear a man's character in the way he stirs his coffee. Most folks clink the spoon like a child banging a toy drum, rushed, loud, careless. But not Trevor. No, Trevor moved that spoon in slow, deliberate circles. The kind of stir that said, "I've already counted what's in your wallet." That morning I watched him from across the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug that no longer held any warmth. His sleeves were rolled up, trying too hard to be casual, and his eyes too focused for someone pretending to be interested in my opinions on snow tires. He thought I didn't notice, but I did. I noticed everything. "You ever think of putting in laminate flooring, Howard?" Trevor asked, eyes flicking to the hallway. "This place would look a lot more modern." I smiled politely, stirred my coffee once. Not loud, not soft, just enough. "This place has looked the same for 47 years, I said. "And I sleep just fine." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just trying to help, future planning." That's what he called it, future planning. Like I was already gone. Like this house was some stale loaf of bread waiting to be passed on. He'd moved in 2 weeks earlier, said he and my daughter had hit a rough patch, needed space. I believed in giving second chances. I believed in giving people the rope they needed to climb or to hang themselves. It didn't take long to see which direction Trevor was pulling. The first day he complimented the woodwork in the hallway. The second, he asked where I kept my spare keys. The third, he waited until he thought I was asleep, then creaked around the floorboards outside my study. He thought I was just an old janitor with a pension and a paid-off house. He had no idea what I'd buried under this floor. He had no idea what I used to do. But we'll get to that. I used to sweep floors for a living. That part's true. 40 years at the Kenwood Research Institute. I mopped the same 6 corridors so many times I could walk them blindfolded. People never looked twice at me, just the old guy with keys on his hip and a bucket that squeaked. What they didn't know was that the bucket held more secrets than some of their briefcases. When the mainframe went down in '93, I saw the backups being wheeled through. When did the cryogenics lab fail its pressure test in 2001? I was the one who cleaned the shattered glass before they called in the board. I didn't have a clearance badge, but I had eyes. And I had ears. So when they decommissioned the old R-17 prototype, a machine they swore never existed, I took something. A keepsake. Call it curiosity. Call it revenge for being invisible all those years. Either way, I didn't tell anyone. That device now lives under my floorboards, wrapped in cloth, sealed in a waterproof case. Worth more than anything Trevor's ever seen in his adult life. And this fool thought I didn't notice him measuring the hallway with his eyes. The next morning, I laid the trap. Not the final trap. Not yet. Just something small to test the waters. I left a piece of tape under the hallway rug, barely visible but perfectly aligned with the floorboards above the crawlspace. I wanted to see if it moved. Trevor spent the day pretending to make phone calls in the backyard. Loud, dramatic, vague phrases about potential investors and being this close to landing the deal. I wasn't listening to the content. I was listening to the silence in between, the kind that follows when someone's rehearsing lies. That night I heard him, not through the door, not through the walls, through the wood. There's a very specific creak between the 7th and 8th boards in my hallway. Always has been. I left it that way. Like a doorbell for trespassers. It's not the kind of sound you notice unless you've lived with it half your life. But I heard it. Clear as a guilty conscience. The next morning the tape was misaligned by half an inch. My spoon stirred once, then I set the mug down. Trevor walked in towel over his shoulder, shirtless, confident, the kind of confidence only a man can have when he thinks the world owes him something. "Morning, Howard," he said, pouring himself coffee before I could offer. "You sleep all right?" I asked. He yawned. Took a melatonin. Out like a rock. He didn't ask me how I slept. I waited, and then casually I said, "You know this house isn't as simple as it looks." Trevor froze mid-sip. Built it myself, back when things were made to last. There are things in the walls no one knows about. His brow twitched. Like what? Old wiring, reinforcements, and storage. I watched his pupils dilate like a thief seeing the edge of a safe. He tried to recover. Interesting. I mean, it's smart. You never know who you can trust these days. That's true, I said, standing. You never do. I walked out but left the kitchen door half open, just enough to hear his breathing change. The next step was classic misdirection. I spent the afternoon in my basement workshop, the only place in the house Trevor never dared enter. The stairs were too narrow, the lighting too poor, and the air too full of sawdust. It felt like honesty down there. He avoided it like a confession booth. I built a fake lockbox. Nothing fancy, just an old toolbox cleaned up and polished. I placed a few classified documents inside, carefully aged with tea stains and burnt edges, and then I left it, partially visible, in the coat closet, like bait. Trevor found it within 24 hours. How did I know? Because the next morning he asked, "Hey, Howard, ever think of upgrading your home insurance? Hook, line, sinker." There's a type of man who thinks he's the smartest in the room, usually because he's never been in a room full of people who stop talking when he enters. Trevor was that kind of man, but he didn't know I'd spent 40 years listening to silence, and silence tells you everything. I won't tell you yet how the final trap went down. That's for another day. But I'll tell you this, I know what Trevor is. I know what he wants, and I've already decided how the story ends. Not with a shout, not with a gun, but with something much harder to wash off. Trust me, when you spend 4 decades cleaning up other people's messes, you learn exactly how to make one they'll never forget. People forget things when you stop reminding them. They forget who built the porch they drink their morning coffee on. They forget who fixed the water heater in February when the pipes sang like old ghosts. They forget who taught them to ride a bike, to drive a stick shift, to sharpen a blade without dulling the edge. But more than anything, they forget that quiet doesn't mean soft. And I had been quiet for a long, long time. Trevor wasn't the first to underestimate me. He was just the first to do it while living under my roof. Back when I still worked at Kenwood, the younger engineers used to call me Wall Shadow. Not out loud, of course, but I heard it, whispered behind screens, half laughed in elevators, mumbled over vending machine coffee. To them, I was just the janitor, the mop man, the guy who fixed the flickering light in conference room B without needing to be asked. Someone you stepped around, not someone you looked at. And they liked it that way, because as long as I was invisible, they could talk freely. They could forget I existed even as I stood 3 feet away, Windex in hand. That was their mistake. I remember one morning back in '07, the head of Project Sentinel, Dr. Roland Shea, stormed out of the testing lab, red in the face, tie flapping behind him like a warning flag. He didn't see me by the vending machine. No one ever did. He turned to his assistant and hissed, "If the prototype fails again, we're finished. I want it buried." That same night, the R-17 serial number disappeared from the system. A week later, the entire wing was repurposed for budget reasons. And by then, the prototype, wrapped in plastic, placed in a sealed crate marked expired refrigerant, and wheeled right past me while I was buffing the floors. I let it sit in storage for 2 months. Then, after the fiscal year turnover, when the inventory system reset, I took it home. No one asked, no one noticed, because no one ever notices the man pushing the mop. I wasn't born cunning. But you live long enough in other people's blind spots, and you either get bitter or you get careful. I chose carefully, which is why the night after Trevor asked about home insurance, I went out to my garage and retrieved something I hadn't touched in over a decade, a slim black notebook wrapped in oilcloth. My old record book, not of bills, not of birthdays, of patterns. Entries in careful, steady handwriting. Which neighbors leave for work before sunrise? When the mailman shifts his route? What sounds raccoons make compared to boots on gravel? I flipped to a blank page and titled it, Trevor Week 2. Then I began logging. Tuesday. Pretends to take business calls outside. Repeats the same phrases. One call ends with, "Okay, Thursday works." Marked time 11:43 a.m. Wednesday. Observed standing at the top of the basement stairs, Did not enter. Eyes scanned the interior. Left abruptly when I entered the kitchen. Thursday. Left coffee mug near hallway cabinet. Fingerprints were positioned near the handle of the drawer containing fake documents. Every entry was dated, timed, and underlined. Not for court, not for the police. For me. I don't trust what I remember. I trust what I write down. Friday morning, I added something new. Not in ink, but in drywall. While Trevor and my daughter were out some brunch her friend had planned, I removed the vent cover in the upstairs hallway and slipped in an old hunting camera fitted with a motion sensor and night vision lens. It faced the floorboards directly above the crawl space. The same boards Trevor had paced across 3 nights in a row. I adjusted the lens angle until I could see the grain of the wood. Then I resealed the vent. Carefully, quietly, like I had never been there at all. That night I pretended to fall asleep in my recliner, TV murmuring some documentary about ancient tools. Trevor watched it with me, though his eyes were elsewhere, always elsewhere. By 9:12 p.m. I heard their bedroom door close. By 10:04 p.m. it opened again. Trevor crept down the hallway, careful not to let the floor groan. But the wood always talks, especially to the man who laid it. The next morning I checked the hunting cam. 5 new clips. Each one is a symphony of deception. Trevor crouched low, measuring with his eyes, pressing fingers between boards, tapping gently like a burglar testing a safe's hinges. At one point he pulled out his phone and took a photo. He thought he was gathering intel. What he didn't know was he was already in the file. The real heartbreak in all of this was Lauren, my daughter. She still believed the man she married had simply hit a streak of bad luck. She still believed his stories about a startup collapsing due to external mismanagement, about the back pay that never came, about debt collectors being vultures. And maybe a small part of her just didn't want to look too closely, because once you do, you can't unsee it. That's how betrayal works. It doesn't arrive with fangs and fury. It arrives with a smile and excuses, and it eats from the inside out. When Lauren was a little girl, she used to help me clean the garage on Saturdays. She'd wear my old tool belt cinched up to her ribs and announce what each tool was, even when she got them wrong. She called the wrench the bone, the socket set the teeth, and the flashlight the dragon stick. One afternoon, while organizing screws by size, she looked up at me and asked Dad, "Why don't you ever get mad?" I was younger then, sharper around the edges, but I remember kneeling beside her, pressing a small washer into her palm. Because when you fix things for a living, I said, you learn that rage just makes the screws go crooked. She nodded solemnly like a knight receiving sacred knowledge. And maybe she forgot, but I didn't. Saturday evening we had chili. I made it from scratch, my late wife's recipe. Simple, hearty, the kind of meal that made you feel full in more ways than one. Trevor talked the whole time about job leads, about maybe going back to school, about how things were finally turning. Lauren beamed. I stirred my bowl, said little, but my ears were wide open, because people always talk more when they think you're done listening. Later that night, I went into the crawl space, not through the hallway, through the garage, the way Trevor didn't know existed, past the breaker panel behind the utility sink. There, tucked into the insulated cavity behind the west wall, sat a steel lockbox. Not safe, just a box, but its contents blueprints, photographs, diagrams of the R-17 scribbled with annotations in red ink. Proof not of a crime, but of a secret. Something they tried to erase. Something I had kept hidden, not out of greed, but out of principle. Some things don't belong in labs. They belong in memory, or in wood. Back upstairs, I sat at my kitchen table, the lights off the house still, and I wrote. Trevor, week 3, Saturday night. Smiled too easily. Asked about my will. Mentioned legacy 3 times. Eyes lingered in the hallway twice during dinner. Fingers smelled faintly of lemon oil used for loosening wood grain. Then I closed the notebook and slid it into a drawer beneath the tea towels. Not locked, but placed just so, because the next part of the test I was seeing if Trevor would take the bait. They say the worst lies aren't told with words, but with silence, with soft steps past a closed door, with a breath held too long, with the absence of hesitation when there should have been some. That night, I heard everything. The hush between floorboards, the betrayal carried on the soles of borrowed shoes, and still I didn't move, I didn't speak, because I wanted to hear it all. I wanted to let the truth walk around my house without shoes, so I could feel every step of it. He thought I was asleep. That was his first mistake. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the hallway creaked. Not in the way it does when the house settles. No, this was different. This was careful, chosen, calculated. I had loosened the baseboard near the vent just enough so it would catch the edge of any unfamiliar weight. That soft click, that sigh of wood under pressure, it was the sound of trespass. Trevor. It was always going to be Trevor. Earlier that evening, I had gone through the full routine. Pill bottle shaken twice for his benefit, a theatrical yawn before lights out, the slow shuffle toward the bedroom like my bones couldn't remember their youth. Then silence. But my eyes stayed open in the dark, my ears tuned to the walls. My phone tucked under the covers is already streaming the camera feeds. You see, when a man has had his life stolen once he learns not to sleep deeply ever again. I learned that lesson in 1983. But that's a story for another night. Trevor didn't knock. He didn't call out. He simply entered the hallway like a man walking into a vault he believed was his by right. I watched on the screen as he approached the rug, the one I'd carefully laid not to hide anything but to suggest there was something worth hiding underneath. He knelt, took a glance toward my bedroom, then slowly rolled the rug back. Third board from the left. I saw his hands hesitate like he was bracing for treasure. But what kind of treasure? Trevor, what were you hoping for? An envelope of bearer bonds, a key to a hidden account, a confession. The tool he used, an old flathead wrapped in a dish towel, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a spontaneous act. This was premeditated, planned, polished. He'd thought about this, fantasized about it. And that fantasy had bloomed into action right there on my hardwood floor. The board lifted with a soft groan. He winced, stopped, waited. My breathing stayed measured, unbroken. That's the thing about men like Trevor. They only take what they think no one will miss. And they only move forward when they believe no one is watching. Inside the hollow space, he found a black case the size of a hardback book. Clean, locked. Next to it, a single folded piece of paper. He took the note first, opened it under the dull green light of his phone's screen. His lips moved as he read the message I had written 12 hours earlier. Congratulations. Now turn around. On the feed, I saw his shoulders stiffen. His head twitched ever so slightly toward the camera he hadn't seen. The phone dropped. Light hit the wall. And then he turned. I was already in the hallway. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just there. A man is awake. A man standing in his own home watching a guest become a thief. He froze. Howard, he stammered. I thought I heard something. Wasn't sure if maybe a pipe burst or... You're holding a crowbar and a linen towel, Trevor, I said calmly. Not a wrench, not a flashlight. A crowbar. His eyes darted down to the tool, then back to me. It's not what it looks like. I nodded. No, it's exactly what it looks like. He tried to laugh, a dry, nervous thing that clung to the corners of his mouth like old toothpaste. Lauren was worried about you. She said sometimes you talk in your sleep. I thought I'd check in. Thought maybe you were hiding something dangerous. I am, I said. But it's not under the floor. I turned and walked, not back to the bedroom, not toward safety, but toward memory, toward the garage, toward the truth. He followed. Of course he did. Curiosity is the leash of liars. Inside the garage, the overhead bulb cast a wide circle of yellow light, the kind that made every shadow seem like it had something to hide. The workbench was spotless, the tools lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. I walked to the back cabinet, entered the code, pulled out a second case, darker, heavier, etched with 3 letters he didn't recognize. He squinted. What is that, you tell me? I said, setting the box on the bench. He reached for it. I stepped between. You know, my father used to say, a man's fingerprints are never just on what he touches, they're on what he expects to find. So let me ask you, what did you expect tonight? He didn't answer. Did you think I was hiding cash? A secret will? Something you could use against me? Or maybe you thought there was no harm in looking, That if you didn't find anything, no one would ever know. Still silence. I opened the case just enough for him to see a sliver of black, no documents, no diamonds, no code books. Just one very old, very personal tape recorder. "What's that?" he asked, voice cracking. "A memory," I said. "A voice I don't hear anymore. I keep it here not because it's valuable, but because it's sacred. And you almost defiled it." He backed away. "I didn't mean, but you did. You meant every step, every lie. Every question you asked Lauren was about the financial situation. Every fake smile. Every dinner where you cleared the plates like a man playing house, not building one." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and laid it on the bench. "You want to see something valuable? That's the last 7 days. Audio. Video. You are in night vision. You in HD. You are in my home, rifling through memories that never belonged to you." His hands trembled. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I said nothing else. Just walked back to the hallway, stopped at the door, looked at him one last time. "You have 15 minutes to pack your things. You wake Lauren, you lie to her face. This drive goes to her inbox." And trust me, I already wrote the subject line. He didn't move. Not at first, but I waited. And men like Trevor always move when silence becomes too heavy. 15 minutes later, the guest room door clicked. The suitcase rolled. The front door opened and closed without a word. I didn't change the locks. I didn't have to. Some men never return to the places where they were seen clearly. Lauren woke late, asked where he'd gone. I told her he'd gotten a call about a family emergency, left a note, promised to explain later. She nodded. Didn't press. Maybe she believed it. Maybe she didn't. Love, as I said before, is often the quiet between questions. That night I sat in the garage alone, listened to the tape one more time. A voice from decades ago. A woman saying, "You were always the one who listened when no one else did." That was Ellen, my late wife. The only person who ever knew the whole story. Now Trevor knows part of it. Just the edges. The sharp ones. Enough to bleed. Not enough to understand. And me, I went to bed that night knowing the house was quiet again. Not just still, not just empty, but truly quiet. Because the worst kind of noise isn't what you hear, it's what you know is coming. And for once, nothing was. I didn't need to punish Trevor. I didn't need to ruin him. I just needed him to leave and know that someone had been watching all along. You see, men like him never expect the old man to be the sharpest knife in the drawer. But sometimes it's the quietest blade that cuts the deepest. And now I sleep. The thing about houses they don't forget. Not the creaks, not the footprints, not the whispers behind closed doors, and certainly not the people who walked through them thinking no one noticed. I've always said a house will remember what the heart tries to ignore. After Trevor left, the quiet came back. But it wasn't peace. It was a pause. A breath held in the drywall. An exhale waiting for closure. I sat in the garage 3 nights in a row staring at that old black case with the initials carved into the lid, CWG. Not mine, not Trevor's, but a man whose shadow still lingered in the corners of this home like an unpaid debt. Clarence Walter Glitter, my brother. We built this house together. Literally. Poured the foundation one summer when we were still young enough to think concrete could fix anything. It was supposed to be for our parents, a retirement dream. But they died in a car accident on the highway the week before the first coat of paint dried. That left us with grief, and a house full of echoes. Clarence didn't take it well. He drank, gambled, then drank more to forget the gambling. Eventually, I bought him out. Quietly. No lawyers, no bitterness. Just 2 signatures and a firm handshake on the porch one morning while the dew still clung to the roses like an apology. But the real damage didn't come until years later. Clarence came back. Not for me. Not even for the house. He came for Ellen. Yes, my Ellen, the woman who used to laugh like wind chimes. Who could tell if a man was lying just by how he buttered his toast, the only person who ever really saw both of us? Clarence was charming when he was sober, dangerous when he wasn't. And Ellen, God help her, was always too kind for her good. She thought she could fix him, just like I'd once tried to. But broken glass doesn't become a mirror again just because you believe in reflections. It wasn't an affair, not in the way most people think of it. There were no motel rooms, no lipstick stains, but there were long conversations behind closed doors, quiet tears in the laundry room, and once a letter never sent was left behind in her recipe book, a letter I wasn't supposed to find. It read, "Howard listens, Clarence needs." That was it. No signature, no explanation, just those 4 words that said more than an entire courtroom ever could. I never confronted her, not directly. Some wounds you choose not to lance, because the infection has already spread too far, and because you love the person more than the truth. But that night something inside me fractured. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I sat in the attic for hours, holding that letter like it was evidence in a trial no one would attend. And when the sun rose, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I built something. A compartment under the floorboards, the third one from the left, not to hide valuables but to bury pain. A vault for the things I couldn't say. I placed the letter inside, along with a cassette tape, a message Ellen recorded 1 year before she passed. Her voice on that tape. It didn't tremble. It didn't apologize. It simply told a story about 2 brothers, one who stayed, one who always ran, and the woman who loved them both but differently. Clarence died 3 months after Ellen. Liver failure. No will. No family. Nothing but a name and a box of unpaid bills. I paid for the cremation. Didn't attend. Instead, I sat in the garage and listened to that tape until the sun dipped below the oaks and the light disappeared from the windows like forgiveness slipping out the door. Lauren never knew. She was away at college when Ellen passed. She'd always idolized her Uncle Clarence. He was the fun one, the one who brought her giant teddy bears and let her eat dessert before dinner. I never had the heart to correct the story. Maybe that was my second mistake. My first was believing silence could protect anyone. Trevor was a reminder, not a surprise. He was the echo of everything I'd locked away. A man looking for secrets without realizing they were already carved into the walls. After he left, Lauren became distant. Not angry, just unsure. The kind of quiet that builds between 2 people who both know something happened but can't agree on what. One morning she brought me coffee, set it down without a word, then stood there arms folded like a woman preparing to knock on a door she wasn't sure she wanted opened. "Dad," she said finally, "was Trevor in trouble?" I looked at her over the rim of my mug. "Why do you ask?" "He told me once that people don't come into money clean, that it sticks to things, that you had a past." I smiled gently. Everyone has a past. Even saints have shadows. "But did he lie to me?" she asked. "Did you make him leave?" I paused. Not for effect. For truth. I didn't make him leave. I let him go. She didn't ask anything else, just nodded, then walked outside the screen door, clicking shut like punctuation. And I realized then the story would never be clean. Not for her, not for me, not for anyone who walks through a house built on memory. That afternoon I opened the black case again. Inside was a second letter. My own. Not addressed to anyone but written for someone. A confession, not of guilt, but of grief, of choices, of silence. I'd written it the night before Ellen's funeral but never mailed it, never showed it, just folded it and slid it next to hers, 2 pages bound by the gravity of what was never said aloud. And then I remembered something she once told me years ago when Lauren was still in pigtails and Clarence was still pretending to be someone worth saving. She said secrets only stay buried when you stop digging. Maybe it was time to stop covering the tracks, time to let the house speak for itself. That evening I took Lauren to the attic, a place she hadn't visited since she was 12. We sat on the old trunk where her mother used to keep Christmas decorations, and I told her everything, not to erase her memories, but to let her rewrite them with the truth. When I finished, she didn't cry, didn't rage. She just leaned against me and whispered, "You should have told me sooner." And I said I didn't know how. That was the moment the quiet lifted. Not completely, but enough for the air to move again. Enough for the floorboards to stop creaking with judgment. Enough for my daughter to look at me not as a mystery, but as a man. That night I slept in the bedroom, not the garage, not the attic. And when I closed my eyes, I dreamed of paint on fresh drywall and 2 brothers standing side by side in the sunlight, unaware of the war to come. Because sometimes memory doesn't punish. Sometimes it forgives. And a house, if you let it, will let you start again. I wasn't surprised when the letter came back unopened. Lauren's handwriting shaky hesitant on the envelope I had mailed 2 weeks ago, addressed to Trevor's sister in Boise. I'd known she wouldn't open it. Some wounds don't respond to apologies, especially when they arrive in someone else's name. I didn't blame her. Some doors once shut are meant to stay that way, but I kept the letter, slipped it into the same drawer that used to hold my wedding band, right beside the old garage clicker that still works, even though the garage itself is now padlocked empty. What I didn't know then was that Trevor hadn't gone far. He'd only gone underground. A man like that doesn't disappear. He adjusts. He waits. And in waiting, he becomes something worse than he was before patient. The first sign was subtle. A credit alert from a service I hadn't used in over a decade. A new inquiry was placed on your file, it read. Then another. Then 3 more, all in cities I hadn't set foot in since the Reagan administration. I knew the smell of someone probing, trying to find a crack. I didn't panic. I documented. I updated passwords, froze every account, and scheduled a meeting with a lawyer I trusted more than I trusted most friends. You see, that's the luxury of age. You've already seen how the knives are thrown. You don't flinch anymore, you lean into the motion and count the seconds before they hit the wall behind you. Trevor's next move came wrapped in civility. A knock at the door just after dusk. Not loud, not urgent, but persistent. I opened it with my left hand behind the doorframe, gripping the handle of the security latch. It wasn't Trevor. It was someone worse, a man in a cheap suit with expensive shoes, polished like a politician's smile. "Mr. Glitter," he asked, tone smooth as syrup. "My name's Daryl King. I'm a financial recovery specialist working with a client regarding some old records tied to your previous ventures." I didn't answer, just studied the crease in his collar and the laminated badge that dangled from his coat pocket like a prop in a high school play. "You were listed as a silent partner in a company called Ridgepoint Solutions," he continued, tapping at a tablet screen. "Dissolved in 1998. But some liabilities remain unresolved." Ridgepoint. That name hadn't passed my lips in 25 years. It had been buried beneath a web of shell filings and misdirection. That was intentional, not to escape justice, but to keep justice from being hijacked by opportunists like this man and the parasite who had surely sent him. "You're mistaken," I said. Calm, controlled. "I've never heard of it." He smiled. The kind of smile that expects resistance. "Of course, these things get messy over time. But just so you're aware, if you receive any formal notices, we recommend prompt cooperation." He handed me a card. The number printed on it didn't connect to anything when I called it later that night. No voicemail, no signal, just silence. I didn't tell Lauren. She'd just started sleeping again, her face soft in the mornings in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. I didn't want to take that from her, not yet. But inside I knew something was shifting. Trevor wasn't trying to just steal anymore, he was trying to erase, piece by piece. If he couldn't steal what I had, he'd try to burn the legacy I'd spent a lifetime crafting. And like any man who lacks the courage to build, he'd chosen the backdoor path. Legal harassment, identity tampering, the slow bleed of a man's dignity through loopholes and shadows. So I did what I've always done best. I prepared. First, I visited the courthouse, pulled my records, filed 2 precautionary motions, sealed some documents, relocated others to a trust structure so dense that a team of auditors would need a year to chart it out. Then I called in a favor, a quiet one, from someone who owed me not money but memory. 40 years ago, I helped him bury a scandal that could have destroyed his family. Now he works in forensic cybersecurity, and his loyalty is like tempered steel forged in debt and silence. Within 48 hours, he had located the IP addresses of Trevor's last 3 login attempts. One from a motel outside Fort Collins, one from a public library in Springfield. But the third, that one hit too close. A co-working space is just 12 miles from my home. Trevor was back, or maybe he never left. I didn't go looking for him, I didn't need to. Desperation makes people stupid, and he was proving to be a virtuoso in that regard. A week later, Lauren received an email. Subject line: important update regarding your father's estate. No sender listed, just a document link. She was about to open it on her phone, standing in the kitchen, still wearing her work badge. But something in her posture made me look up. She was too still. Her thumb hovered, frozen in that half second before a mistake is made. "Wait," I said gently. "Don't click that." She looked confused, then concerned. I took the phone from her hand, forwarded the message to my contact. He called me 10 minutes later. "It's a malware trap," he said. If she'd clicked it, her device would have been breached in seconds. Most likely a keylogger embedded. Classic phishing move, but dressed up in estate legalese. Sophisticated. I nodded, though no one could see me. "Can you trace it?" I asked. "Not directly," he said, "but I found a data trail. Someone used her name to try to access a property database in Tulsa. 2 attempts failed. 1 succeeded. Tulsa. A place I hadn't lived in since the early 90s. But I still had assets there. Quiet ones. An old rental property bought under a different name. My retirement plan. Trevor had found it, but he hadn't found the deed, because the deed didn't exist in any one file. It existed in 5, split across jurisdictions, stored physically, protected by laws older than his ambition. So instead of fighting him, I let him believe he was winning. I planted 3 more digital breadcrumbs, each more enticing than the last. 1 hinted at a lawsuit payout from a tech settlement I was never involved in. 1 claimed an undisclosed mineral rights ownership, and the third, a beauty, hinted at a hidden will. Undistributed estate assets. See enclosed family codicil. Each of them was encoded, time-stamped, then leaked into the exact databases I knew he was watching. He took the bait. How do I know? Because his name appeared in one of the dark web exchange logs, an amateur's mistake. Using a private login to search proprietary databases without masking his trail. He was greedy. But worse, he was sloppy. That's when I knew it was time to flip the switch. I scheduled an appointment with Lauren's estate lawyer under a false name. Used a trusted intermediary to deliver a sealed folder. Inside, all the surveillance logs, screenshots, forged documents Trevor had planted, and a statement of preemptive legal protection signed by me and notarized. It was a net. Quiet. Precise. Ironclad. But more than that, it was a gift for Lauren, so she would never again question whether the silence of her father meant weakness. The final nail came a week later in a plain envelope slipped into my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Me sitting in my backyard, reading. A telephoto lens had caught it from across the street. The threat wasn't loud, but it was clear. He was watching me now, trying to intimidate me, to tell me I wasn't safe even in my own home. So I smiled, because that meant he didn't know. Didn't know the cameras that captured him leaving that co-working space had already forwarded his image to a private investigator I'd hired 6 weeks ago. Didn't know his real name wasn't on the lease he forged, but the fake one he used was linked to an outstanding fraud case in Oregon. Didn't know that every step he took was now on record, wrapped in timestamps and handed over to an attorney with a reputation for gutting predators like a fisherman cleaning trout. Trevor had moved into my world now, the world of deliberate men, of old bones and older secrets, of maps with roads he didn't know how to follow, and the storm he thought he'd unleash. He'd only triggered the eye. Because sometimes the quiet man in the corner isn't retreating, he's calculating, and when he stands, he doesn't raise his voice. He simply closes the door behind him and locks it. The silence after Trevor's departure wasn't peace, it was a pause. A moment suspended in breath, like the held hush between the last note of a song and the applause that may or may not come. For 3 days I moved through my routines like a man walking across thin ice, careful not to crack the stillness. But on the 4th day, I opened the workshop cabinet, took out the case with the 3 initials, and placed it on the kitchen table. Lauren saw it that evening. She didn't ask. She just stared, then went upstairs. That silence. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. The story of those initials wasn't one I ever planned to tell, but the weight of it had grown heavier with time. Not because of guilt, but because of what it cost to keep it hidden. It was a name that had once belonged to a friend who trusted me with more than he should have, a friend who disappeared one winter and whose memory still lived in the iron hinges of my house, in the extra key under the porch, and the scars I kept covered with long sleeves. His name was Marcus T. Hall, a name you won't find in any newspaper. A man whose legacy had been wiped clean by those who wanted him forgotten. But I remembered. And the case, it held the only piece of him left, a ledger, handwritten. Ink-faded pages, soft at the edges, but clear. Too clear. Trevor hadn't known what he was looking for because Trevor didn't believe people like me had history worth hiding. He thought I was just another retiree with too much house and too few passwords. But what I still have, is something men like Trevor can't buy: time. Time to watch, time to remember, time to wait. The night after he left, I emailed a contact I hadn't spoken to in years, a man named Elijah, no last name, just Elijah. He replied within 12 minutes, "Still breathing, still watching, ready when you are." I hadn't wanted to involve Elijah again. He had a life now, a family, a business. But the thing about shared secrets is they don't go away just because you stop speaking them aloud. We met 2 days later at a diner off Route 38. Same booth, same waitress, different reason. He looked older, so did I. But our eyes, they remembered. "Trevor," he asked. "Gone, but he's a symptom, not the disease." Elijah nodded, pulled out a folder from his coat. "You should see this," he said. "Inside photos, financial records, emails. Nothing damning on its own, but enough pieces to start a puzzle. And at the center, a foundation. The same one Marcus had once worked for. The same one that had quietly rebranded itself every 5 years since 1987. And the name attached to its newest incarnation, Trevor's. He hadn't just stumbled into my house looking for an inheritance. He was probing, digging, sent, or curious. Either way, he'd opened a door I had long kept locked. "What do you want to do?" Elijah asked. I stirred my coffee, slowly, deliberately, like a man counting the seconds between thunder and lightning. "I want them to remember," I said. We spent the next 10 days building a file. Names, dates, transactions, cross-referenced with city permits, foundation grants, and digital footprints buried 6 subdomains deep. I moved with the patience of a man dusting off landmines. Elijah handled the tech. I handled the memory. Lauren noticed. Of course she did. One night she came down and sat beside me as I worked through Marcus's ledger. "You're not just fixing up the house, are you?" she asked. I looked at her, saw her mother's cheekbones, her uncle's defiance, my eyes. "No," I said. "I'm fixing something older." She didn't press, but she didn't leave either. She sat with me until midnight, said goodnight like she used to when she was 12. Quiet, careful, loving. That weekend, Elijah traced the foundation's IP to a shell firm in New Mexico, another name I recognized, another ghost from a past I'd promised myself I wouldn't revisit. But promises made in comfort rarely survive contact with betrayal. We compiled everything, put it on a private server, encrypted, redundant, sent access keys to 3 people we trusted, people who'd lived through the same shadows. And then we waited. Because revenge, if it must be done, should be orchestrated, not shouted, not messy, not for spectacle, for truth. On a Tuesday morning, a headline slipped into the corner of the local paper: "Local charity under investigation for decades of misappropriation." No names, not yet. But the fuse was lit. By Friday, 2 board members had resigned. By Monday, the story had gone national. I watched from my porch with a cup of black tea and a silence thicker than smoke. Trevor hadn't come back, but his name had. Lauren approached me that evening. She had the folded note I'd left in the black case. She didn't ask how I knew, just said, "I wish I'd seen it sooner." "Sometimes," I said, "the hardest thing to see is the person you love being someone else." She nodded, slid her hand into mine. That night I slept with the windows open, let the air carry out everything I'd been holding in for years. The past doesn't die. It waits. But so do I. Because the house didn't creak that night, it exhaled. The knock on the door came at 6:47 a.m., a time too early for visitors and too late for emergencies. I was already up seated in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee, the kind that doesn't wake you but reminds you you're still here. I didn't rush to the door. Let it knock once more, deliberate, polite, as if whoever stood behind it knew the rhythm of the house. I opened it to find a woman no taller than Lauren, dressed in a tan blazer and dark jeans, holding a leather folder and a look that said she knew more about me than I wanted her to. "Mr. Glitter," she asked. "Not Howard, not Sir, just the name." I nodded. She extended a card. No flourish, just a fact. Department of Justice, Internal Affairs, name Rachel Lind. The last time I saw a badge like that, Marcus was still alive. She didn't wait for an invitation, just said, "May I come in?" And something in her voice made me step aside without question. She walked in like she'd already memorized the blueprint, sat in the same chair Lauren always did, opened her folder with a sigh too weary for her age. "This isn't official, not yet. I'm off duty." "Technically," she began. I didn't speak. Let her work through it. She laid out photos, not of me, of Trevor, of the foundation, of meetings in parking garages and transactions in hotel lobbies, and then a photo of Marcus, young, laughing. Next to a red Chevy I remembered polishing with him one autumn before it all unraveled. "Why now?" I asked. My voice came out low but steady. She looked up, eyes direct. "Because someone finally whispered loud enough, and the people listening aren't deaf anymore." I didn't ask who whispered. I already knew. Lauren. Rachel continued, her fingers tapping on the edge of the folder like counting down. "I know about the ledger, the server, Elijah. The timeline fits. You've been careful. Too careful to be just angry." I stared at the steam curling from my coffee, then back at her. "What is it you want from me, Agent Lind?" She shook her head. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to ask for your help. If you want to finish this, do it through us. Legally, fully. No backdoors, no anonymous leaks. Make it count." That word count. It stayed in the air like smoke. She stood, left her card on the table, and walked out with the same calm she'd walked in with. No threat, no promise, just presence. That afternoon I found Lauren in the garden. She was trimming the roses, the ones Eleanor used to care for. I didn't speak for a moment, just watched her fingers move with grace and certainty. When she finally looked up, there was no fear in her eyes, only expectation. "You told her," I said. She nodded. "Why?" "Because you were building something alone, and I thought maybe it could carry more weight if I helped lift it." There it was. Not confession, not an apology, alignment. We spent the evening re-reviewing everything. Every page of Marcus's ledger, every line item in the donation streams. Every shadow of a name is buried in the quarterly reports. At midnight, we sent a secure package to Rachel. It wasn't all we had, but it was enough to prove intent, action, consequence. 2 days later, I got the call. Rachel again. "We're moving, quietly, but thoroughly. I'll keep you updated. Stay visible, stay calm." And so I did. For 3 weeks, I stayed put. Watered the lawn, repaired the fence, attended community meetings I hadn't shown up to in years. I became what I once was present. But underneath it all, I was listening, watching, reading between headlines. Then came the subpoena. Not for me, for the foundation, for the board members, for Trevor. He resurfaced that week, showed up at a fundraiser in San Diego, smiling, shaking hands, thinking perhaps that the silence meant survival. That's the thing about men like Trevor. They believe quiet is mercy, but sometimes it's just the echo before the collapse. By the following Monday, Rachel called again. "They're lawyering up, but we're ahead. The documents you sent verified, time-stamped, unaltered. You did your part." That night, Lauren brought out 2 glasses and a bottle of wine I hadn't touched in 15 years. "For Marcus," she said. We drank in silence. Not mourning, not a celebration. Recognition. The next morning, I opened the back drawer of my study, took out a letter, handwritten, unsent, addressed to Marcus's sister. It began, "He never meant to disappear. He just got tired of being erased." I mailed it. Because justice isn't just about punishment. It's about remembrance. And remembering done right is a form of rebellion. As the leaves turned, the news stories intensified. Trevor's name finally appeared in print. Not buried, not padded, just a fact. Whistleblower leads to federal inquiry into decades of nonprofit fraud. My name wasn't there. Neither was Elijah's, nor Lauren's. That was the point. This was never about credit, only closure. And the door finally was beginning to close, but not before one final step, because there was still a safe buried beneath my floorboards, and what it held was never meant to stay hidden forever. The morning news ran the story at 6:03 a.m. Low-volume closed captions, a perfectly timed whisper between the weather and the stock report. I didn't need sound. I knew the look on Trevor's face when that mugshot hit the screen. It wasn't fear. It was disbelief, the kind that only men who thought they were invincible can wear convincingly. Men like him weren't afraid of jail. They were afraid of not being in control. I sat in the den, coffee in hand, watching the sun crawl across the floorboards like a silent witness. Across from me, Lauren read the article on her phone. She didn't say anything for a long time, just nodded once slowly as if confirming something she'd always suspected but never said out loud. Then she looked up. It's starting. And I knew what she meant. Not the arrests, not the news cycles, but the reckoning. Later that afternoon, I drove out to Glen Hollow Cemetery. Not for nostalgia, not for grief, just something close to acknowledgement. Marcus's grave was where I'd left it, row 3, plot 28, under the old oak that cracked every winter and survived anyway. I didn't bring flowers, just myself. I stood there and told him the truth. We're not done yet. But we're close. No wind, no birds, just the kind of silence that lets you hear your bones shift. I don't know if Marcus would have wanted this, but I know he would have understood it. That night I took the floorboards up. The safe hadn't moved, steel, square, unassuming. But what it held was fireproof, water-sealed, and devastating. It wasn't just documents. It was the story behind them, audio recordings, transaction slips, handwritten notes in Trevor's scrawl. It was the truth compressed into a vault that no one but me had touched in 20 years. I didn't open it out of curiosity. I opened it because Rachel had asked for the final piece, and some things you only hand over once. I spent 6 hours cataloging, scanning, and encrypting. Lauren helped. She didn't ask questions, just labeled files and checked timestamps. At one point, she held up an old photo Marcus and I at some fundraiser laughing jackets off collars loose. She stared at it for a long while before slipping it into a folder marked human. When it was all packed, we met Rachel in a motel parking lot 3 towns over. Neutral ground, no digital trail. She wore civilian clothes, but the tension in her shoulders said she hadn't slept. We didn't say much, just handed her the box and a flash drive. She looked at me. You know this is enough to bury him. The board, the foundation, maybe more. I didn't blink. Then bury them. She nodded, got in her car and left. Just like that. Over the next few days, things moved faster than I expected. News outlets picked up leaks from internal memos. Former employees came forward. Donors pulled funding. By the end of the week, the foundation's website displayed a maintenance error page. Trevor's silence grew louder. He stopped appearing in public, stopped returning calls. But the system doesn't care about ghosts. It chases signatures. And Trevor had signed everything. Elijah called that Sunday. First time in over a year. I saw the news, he said. You finally did it. I took a long breath. No, we did. He didn't respond right away. Then, thank you. And I realized something in that moment. Not all debts are paid in money. Some are paid in remembrance, in refusing to let the wrong version win. On Tuesday, Lauren found a letter slipped under our door. No envelope, just a folded sheet of cream paper. Written in careful script, I know what you did, and I'm not angry. I'm relieved. My father would have thanked you himself if he could. No name, but I knew who it was. Marcus's niece. The next morning, Rachel called. It's over, she said. We've got everything we need. The indictments are ready. We'll announce formally on Monday. I waited. And me. You were never the target. You were the witness, a damn good one. I didn't smile, not because I wasn't grateful, but because relief is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout, it exhales. That night I walked through the house, not for any reason, just to feel it. The floorboards, the paint, the shadows that no longer scared me. I ended up in the garage. Same space, same light bulb buzz. but it didn't feel like exile anymore. I ran my hand along the workbench, opened the old drawer, and found a wrench with Marcus's initials etched in it. I'd forgotten it was there. Or maybe I hadn't. I left it out. Let it catch the moonlight. Because some tools aren't meant to be buried. They're meant to remind. The following day, I watched the press conference on a muted screen. Behind the podium, Rachel looked smaller, older, but her voice, even in silence, carried weight. She named names, listed charges, showed proof, not speculation, not revenge, just evidence. Trevor's image flashed across the screen. No mugshot this time. Just a headshot from the Foundation's website, a relic of who he pretended to be. I turned off the TV. Later that evening, Lauren brought in takeout. No cooking, no pretense. Just 2 cartons, 2 forks, and the shared understanding that something big had ended. Over dinner, she asked me, "What now?" I thought for a long time. Finally said, "We clean the garage." She laughed. Real warm. And just like that, life tilted back toward ordinary. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't leave you with fire. It leaves you with space. Space to rebuild, to reclaim, to breathe. And for the first time in years, I did. Inhale, exhale, like a man who'd finally come home. It started with a phone call, not from a lawyer, not from Rachel, but from a number I hadn't seen in 15 years. I recognized it before I even picked up the area code from Bridgewater, the old neighborhood, the one Marcus and I used to call the Fortress of Pretense. I let it ring twice, then answered. Howard. The voice was male, polished, calm. "You're going to want to see this." He didn't say his name. He didn't need to. I knew who it was. Andrew Whitmore, Trevor's former deputy, the man who used to carry his briefcase like it were a crown jewel, the man who had vanished when the first audits came down. I hadn't heard from him since Marcus's funeral, but some ghosts don't stay buried. They linger. Where I asked. The old tennis club. Midnight. Then he hung up. No explanation. No guarantee. Just coordinates wrapped in arrogance. Lauren asked where I was going. I told her I needed to stretch my legs. She didn't push, but I think she knew. She always knew. The road to the tennis club wound through the woods like a scar. The gate was half broken, hanging on one hinge. I parked in the backlot, headlights off, engine humming low like a prayer. Andrew was already there, leaning against a rusted bench, smoking a cigarette with the indifference of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You look old," he said. I shrugged. "So do you." He handed me a manila folder thick with documents. No preamble, no explanation, just wait. "You want the real nail in Trevor's coffin?" That's it. I opened it slowly, page by page. Offshore accounts, shell company transfers, charitable donations rerouted to personal trusts. But the twist, none of it was in Trevor's name. It was in his daughter's. Camille. I looked at Andrew. "Why now?" He flicked ash onto the concrete. "Because the game's over. And I hate unfinished stories." We didn't speak again. I left without saying goodbye. Some conversations are just tombstones with sound. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and read every page. 3 hours, 2 coffees. One slow-burning realization Trevor hadn't just stolen. He'd built a legacy of theft, passed it on like inheritance. Camille wasn't innocent. She was the next generation of empire built on ruin. By morning, I called Rachel, told her everything. She was quiet on the other end. "Then we'll verify it. If it holds, we add her to the indictment." But I wasn't calling for legal justice. I was calling because I had one more stop. The old Foundation headquarters had already been shut down, chained doors, boarded windows, like a crime scene without tape. But I still had a key. Legacy has its quirks. I walked through the lobby like a ghost through memory. The receptionist's desk was gone. The awards still hung crooked on the walls, and the hallway smelled of forgotten ambition. Marcus's old office was at the end of the corridor, 3rd door on the left. I opened it. Empty, except for one box. On top of it, a plaque, "To Marcus Elliott for integrity beyond measure." The irony was so thick it choked me. I sat on the floor, opened the box, and found what I didn't know I was looking for: his journal. Leather-bound, edges frayed, inside handwritten notes, reflections, letters to himself. One line caught me off guard. "If I vanish, tell Howard not to forget the 3rd drawer." I stood up so fast my knees cracked, crossed the room to the old desk. The third drawer stuck a little like it was resisting. Inside, a flash drive taped to the bottom. I peeled it off and held it like a fuse. Back home, I plugged it in. There was one file. Audio. Marcus's voice. He sounded tired. Worn, but clear. I'm recording this because I don't trust paper anymore. Trevor's been rerouting funds for months. Says it's for discretion. But I know better. I've traced it to Camille's name. I confronted him last week. He laughed. Said no one would believe me. That I didn't have the stomach to expose him. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm too afraid. But if you're hearing this, Howard, it means I didn't make it. And you'll have to. I sat there frozen. Not in grief. In purpose. The next day I drove back to Rachel's office. No appointment. Just the flash drive. Her assistant tried to stop me. I didn't slow down. Rachel met me in the hallway. This is it, I said. The last word. She took it without a word, and for the first time since this began, I felt like Marcus was in the room again. Not a ghost. A witness. By Thursday, the media had the story. A daughter groomed for corruption. A legacy of laundering. Headlines screamed. Anchors speculated. But behind the noise, I saw what mattered, a picture of Marcus on screen. Smiling. Not as a victim, but as the man who tried. Lauren and I watched it together. She squeezed my hand, said nothing. But her silence felt like applause. That night, Elijah called again. Camille too. I said yes. He sighed. That makes it all complete, doesn't it? No, I said. It makes it honest. Honesty, after all, was never Trevor's currency, but it had always been Marcus's, and now it was mine. The final piece fell into place the following morning. A letter in the mail, no return address. Just a single line inside. You gave him back his name, no signature, just ink. But it was enough, because justice isn't about shouting. It's about restoring the parts history tried to erase. And for the first time in 2 decades, I felt like the record had been corrected. Marcus was more than a footnote now. He was the headline. And I was the last man standing in the silence after the storm. Not angry, not broken, just finished. The day after the final article broke, I went for a walk, not because I needed the air, but because I wanted to hear the way the world sounded after everything had settled. The streets were wet from an early drizzle. Leaves clung to windshields like afterthoughts. I passed the corner bakery where Marcus used to pick up scones on Monday mornings, his version of optimism. I didn't stop, just watched the window steam up from a distance and kept walking. There was nothing left in that place for me. Not anymore. At the post office, an old man held the door open for me. I nodded. He didn't recognize me, but something in his eyes lingered like a flicker of curiosity. Maybe he'd seen the news. Maybe he was just being kind. Either way, I walked through like I had nothing to hide. Because I didn't. Not anymore. Rachel called later that afternoon. She said the grand jury had approved the expanded charges. Camille, along with Trevor, was now officially under investigation. We wouldn't have had enough without Marcus's file, she said. Without you. I didn't respond right away. I was watching the sunset from the porch, the light catching the tops of the trees like they were on fire. Eventually, I said I didn't do it for the courts. She paused. I know. That night I found myself in the garage, not fixing anything, just remembering. The workbench still smelled of cedar and oil. Marcus used to come over after work, lean against the wall and talk while I hammered or sanded or cursed at some stubborn bolt. I sat on the stool, looked at the pegboard full of tools, and thought none of this brought him back, but it had kept me sane. Lauren came in quietly. She stood behind me for a while before speaking. It's over, isn't it? I nodded. As over as these things get. She placed a hand on my shoulder. He'd be proud. I didn't answer, just reached for a wrench and turned it in my hand like a compass pointing home. In the weeks that followed, the headlines shifted. Another scandal, another fall from grace. The world moved on, but not me. I moved through it, quietly, deliberately, like someone who'd walked through fire and found himself neither burned nor victorious, just intact. Elijah invited me to dinner one evening, said he wanted to reconnect. I agreed. When I arrived, his wife hugged me tightly, too tightly, like she'd read something between the lines. We ate roast chicken and potatoes, talked about nothing for hours. But at the end, as I was leaving, Elijah followed me to the door. You know, he said, you didn't just restore Marcus's name. You restored something in all of us. I didn't know what to say to that, so I nodded. Let silence do the talking. The real twist came a month later. A package arrived, no return address. Inside a sealed envelope in a small wooden box. I opened the envelope first. A letter, handwritten. The ink was faint, but unmistakable. Marcus's handwriting. Howard. If you're reading this, then you followed the trail. I knew you would. You were always the one who saw through the noise. This isn't a reward, it's a memory of what we built before it all went sideways. Inside the box is the original key to the Foundation's vault, not the one the board knows about, the real one, the vault behind the painting, you remember. 3rd floor, east wing. Use it or don't. But know this, whatever you find in there, I trust you with it. Not because you're right, but because you never stopped trying. My hands shook as I lifted the lid of the wooden box. A brass key, slightly tarnished, rested on a velvet cloth. I stared at it for a long time. Then I made a call. 2 days later, I stood in front of the old Foundation building again. This time, I had permission. And a locksmith. We made our way to the 3rd floor, east wing. The painting, an abstract swirl of grief and pride, was still there. I moved it aside. There it was. A hidden panel. I inserted the key. The door creaked open to reveal rows of files, tapes, and even reels of old film. A history not erased, but buried. Audio recordings of board meetings, handwritten letters, photos, and in the very back, a single box labeled Elliot M., unsent. I opened it. Dozens of letters, all addressed to people he'd never had the chance or the courage to confront. One for Trevor, one for Camille, even one for me. Howard, I resented you once, thought you were too careful, too unwilling to rock the boat. But now I see. You were the only one trying to keep it from sinking. I wish I'd told you that. I wish I'd trusted you sooner. Maybe then things would have ended differently. But you're here now. And that means everything I couldn't say doesn't have to stay buried. Thank you. I sat on the floor surrounded by pieces of a man I had admired, envied, lost, and finally understood. When I emerged blinking into the sunlight, I wasn't carrying evidence. I was carrying memory, legacy, a truth no court could fully honor, but one that now lived in the open. I didn't go back to the headlines or the courtrooms. I went home. Lauren met me at the door. No questions, just a quiet dinner, warm light, the sound of a world that no longer demanded retribution. Later I stepped outside, stood barefoot in the grass, and looked up. The sky was clear. Not clean, but clear. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I didn't need to fight anymore. Because justice had come. Not with fanfare, but with stillness. And in that stillness, I found peace. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.